My son Marcus cut off my access to the bank account and waited for me to come crawling back, begging for help. A whole month passed and I never called him once. When he finally drove over to my place and saw what car was parked right out front, his legs started to shake. But let me tell you how this whole mess began. Welcome to Martha's Stories. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Drop a comment down below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single comment, and it helps me to know I'm not alone in this. I was in line at the grocery store, my cart completely full. I had chosen every single item with care, calculating the prices just like I always did. Because even though there was money in that account, I never stopped being the woman who learned how to stretch every single dollar. I pushed the vegetables through the chicken, the detergent, and the medication for my blood pressure. The cashier smiled and said the total $187.50. I slid my debit card through the reader. I waited. The machine gave a dry, clipped sound. Declined. The cashier frowned. I tried again, but it was declined once more. I felt the blood rush to my face. The people behind me started shifting nervously. Someone sighed, impatient. The cashier looked at me with that mix of pity and annoyance I will never forget. I had to leave the full cart right there and walk out of the store with empty hands and my head hanging low. I got home shaking, not from the cold, but from a humiliation that was burning me up inside. I tried to log into the bank app on my phone user or password incorrect. I called the bank. The automated voice asked me to verify my identity. After 10 minutes on hold, a young woman explained to me in a professional, distant voice that my access to the account had been modified. Only the primary account holder could make transactions. Now Marcus, my son Marcus, the same one who had insisted 2 years ago that we put everything in his name to make things easier so I wouldn't have to worry about a thing. How foolish I was. How blind. How naive to believe that my own child, the creature I carried in my belly, the baby I nursed, the boy I raised alone after his father up and left us, would never do something like this to me. I hung up the phone and stayed put on the living room sofa, the very same sofa where Marcus used to sit as a boy watching cartoons while I got home from my second job. My feet swollen and aching, I looked around the walls of this small condo that I'd paid for with years of cleaning other people's houses, with double shifts at the diner, with every single penny I saved by denying myself everything that wasn't strictly necessary. Also, he could go to college. Also, he could have what I never did. And now I was here cut off from my own money, unable to buy my own food, unable to pay for my own medication. I reached for the phone, looked up his number. My finger hovered over the screen. I almost dialed. I almost called him to ask what had happened, to beg him, to explain, to plead with him to fix his mistake. But something inside me, something small but hard as a stone, stopped me. Because it wasn't a mistake. I knew it in that instant with a clarity that pierced my chest. Marcus knew exactly what he was doing. He had cut off my access, waiting for me to run to him, desperate, humiliated, begging for his help, waiting to see me on my knees, waiting to have that power over me, over his own mother. I put the phone down. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Not yet. Maybe never. I got up from the sofa and walked into the kitchen. I opened the cabinet. There was rice beans, a little oil salt. I could survive a few days on that. I had survived worse things. I had survived his father's abandonment. I had survived the poverty that forced me to wash other people's clothes until my hands bled. I had survived the sleepless nights sewing uniforms to earn a few extra dollars. I had survived everything, and I would survive this too. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator, feeling my mind replay every moment of the last few months. The signs had been there. I simply hadn't wanted to see them. The visits that grew further and further apart, the calls that became shorter and colder, the way Marcus would look away when I spoke, the way his wife Tiffany, That woman who never looked at me with genuine affection would smile smugly whenever she saw me. The forgotten birthdays, the broken promises, the Mother's Day that passed without a single word from him. I remembered the last time I went to their house. It was 3 months ago. I had baked his favorite chocolate cake, the one I used to make when he was a boy, the one that always brought a smile to his face. I rang the doorbell. Tiffany opened the door, looking annoyed. She told me they were busy, that I should have called first, that it wasn't a good time. I saw Marcus behind her in the spacious living room of that house, the house I helped pay for with my savings when he was just starting out. He didn't get up. He didn't come to greet me. He just raised his hand in a vague wave and went back to looking at his phone. I stood there, rooted in the doorway, holding that cake like an idiot, feeling the rejection hit me in the chest. I muttered an apology and left. I walked the 4 blocks to the bus stop with the cake in my hands and tears stinging my eyes. But even then, even after that humiliation, I had made excuses. They're stressed. They have a lot of responsibilities. Life is hard for them, too. What stupidity. What monumental stupidity on my part to justify the unjustifiable, to swallow the pain and call it love, to accept the crumbs and call it enough. Now, lying in my bed in the dark, I understood the truth. Marcus hadn't cut off my account access by mistake or carelessness. He had done it because he wanted control, because he wanted to see me weak, because somewhere along the line my son, my baby boy, had become someone capable of punishing his own mother for the simple act of existing. I closed my eyes and an image flashed in my mind. Marcus at 7 years old crying because the kids at school were making fun of his ripped sneakers. Me kneeling in front of him, wiping his tears, and promising him he'd have new shoes soon. I worked 3 shifts in a row that week. I scrubbed toilets, floors, and windows. I came home every night with my body broken. But on Friday, I put a brand new pair of sneakers on his bed. He jumped for joy, hugged me, and told me I was the best mom in the world. That boy didn't exist anymore. The man he had become was a stranger, a cruel stranger. The following days were a parade of memories that I had buried under layers of excuses and blind hope. Every time I closed my eyes, a different scene appeared. One more piece of the puzzle I had refused to put together. I remembered last Christmas. I had saved for months to buy Marcus that fancy watch he wanted, one of those elegant watches important businessmen wear. It cost me $300. $300 that meant skipping meals, walking instead of taking the bus, not buying the coat I desperately needed for winter. I wrapped it in the prettiest paper I could find. I arrived at their house on the afternoon of December 24th with the gift in my hands and a nervous smile on my face. Tiffany opened the door, looked me up and down with that barely concealed disdain that was now familiar. She let me in, but didn't invite me to sit. I stood by the entrance while she yelled upstairs that I had arrived. Marcus came down the stairs reluctantly, as if my presence was an inconvenience in his perfect day. I gave him the gift. He opened it without looking me in the eye. When he saw the watch, he barely mumbled a dry thanks. Tiffany peered over his shoulder and said they already had 3 identical watches in the drawer. They laughed. Both of them laughed. Marcus didn't even bother to pretend he liked it. He told me they had plans and that I needed to leave. He didn't offer me a drink. He didn't ask how I had gotten there. He didn't wish me a Merry Christmas. I left that house with my heart shattered, yet I still told myself that maybe I was being too sensitive, that maybe they really were busy, that maybe I expected too much lies. It was all lies, I told myself, to avoid facing the truth. I also remembered my 63rd birthday. I waited all day for a call, just one call. I kept the phone close to me every second. I checked it every 5 minutes in case I'd missed a notification. The call never came. But that night, while aimlessly scrolling through social media to distract myself from the loneliness, I saw the pictures. Marcus and Tiffany at a fancy restaurant smiling, clinking wine glasses. The caption read, "Celebrating life and blessings." It was my birthday, and he was celebrating without remembering me. The comments under the photos were from friends, congratulating them, asking what they were celebrating. No one mentioned my name. No one knew it was my birthday, because for Marcus, I no longer existed. I stared at those photos for hours. My son looked so happy, so free, so relieved he didn't have to pretend to care about me. I turned off the phone and cried in the darkness of my room until I had no tears left. I remembered the day I got sick. It was 6 months ago, a bad flu that left me bedridden with a high fever and too weak even to get myself a glass of water. I called Marcus. It rang 5 times before he answered. His voice sounded annoyed. "I'm busy, Mom. I'm in an important meeting." I explained that I felt terrible that I couldn't even get up. There was a long silence. Then he told me to drink some hot tea and rest. That was it. He didn't come to see me. He didn't call back to check on me. He didn't even send a text message. It was 5 days of fever. 5 days during which my neighbor, Miss Gladys Jenkins, a woman I barely knew, was the one who knocked on my door every morning with a thermos of hot soup and medicine she bought with her own money. Her a stranger who owed me nothing, who had no obligation to me while my own son didn't lift a finger. When I finally recovered and called him to tell him I was better, he replied with a distracted, "That's good, Mom," as if we were talking about the weather, as if I were a distant acquaintance and not the woman who brought him into the world. I remembered the times I asked him for help with simple things. A stubborn lock I couldn't open, a light bulb that needed changing on the high ceiling, a heavy piece of furniture that needed moving. He always had an excuse. He was always busy. It was always, "Tomorrow, Mom, I can't today." That tomorrow never came. But when he needed money for the down payment on his house, I didn't hesitate for a second. I gave him my savings, $12,000. I had saved for my old age for emergencies to feel secure. I gave it to him without a second thought because he was my son, because I trusted him, because he promised he'd pay me back in 6 months. 3 years had passed. I hadn't seen a single dollar back, and now I understood why. Marcus never intended to pay it back. He knew I would never ask for it. He knew he could take and take without giving anything in return, because mothers forgive, because mothers forget, because mothers keep loving even when they're treated like trash. I sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of tea in my hands. I looked at the walls of this apartment full of memories. Photos of Marcus at every stage of his life, his first day of school, his graduation, his wedding. In all the photos, I was there always by his side, always smiling, always proud. But in real life, I had ceased to exist for him a long time ago. The truth hit me with brutal force. Marcus hadn't forgotten me by accident. He wasn't too busy. It wasn't that life had absorbed him. He had decided to erase me. He had decided I was a burden, an uncomfortable reminder of his humble past, a shame he preferred to keep far away from his new life of success and appearances. And I, like a fool, had allowed every slight. I had justified every rejection. I had swallowed every humiliation with a smile and a, "It's okay, son, I understand." But no more. Something snapped inside me that night. It wasn't my heart that had been broken a long time ago. It was the invisible chain that tied me to the need for his approval, to the hope that one day he would return to being the boy who hugged me and told me I was his favorite person in the world. That child was dead, and I had to accept it. I got up from the table and walked to my bedroom. I opened the drawer where I kept the old photos. There it was, a picture of Marcus at 5 years old, sitting on my lap, smiling with that gap-toothed grin that melted my heart. I held it between my trembling fingers. A tear fell onto the glossy paper. This child loved me. This child needed me. This child saw me as his hero. But that child no longer existed, and the man he had become didn't deserve another tear. I put the photo back in the drawer. I closed the drawer firmly and made a decision. I wasn't going to call him. I wasn't going to beg him. I wasn't going to give him the pleasure of seeing me broken. If Marcus wanted to play this cruel game of power and control, he would play it alone. I was no longer participating. The first week without calling him was the hardest of my life. Every morning I woke up with the impulse to grab the phone, dial his number, and hear his voice even if it was cold and distant, because even my son's rejection seemed better than this absolute silence that surrounded me. But every time my hand reached for the phone, I remembered the humiliation at the grocery store. I remembered his laughter when he saw the watch I gave him. I remembered how he left me sick and alone for 5 days without even asking if I was still alive. And then I would pull my hand back and take a deep breath. The days dragged on slow and heavy. I sat by the window watching the street. I saw mothers with their children. I saw them laughing together, hugging, and I felt such deep pain in my chest that sometimes it was hard to breathe. But I didn't call. The rice and beans were running out. I counted what was left, maybe enough for 4 more days if I ate small portions. I opened my purse, $22 in cash. That was all I had in the world, $22 and a son who was waiting to see me crawl back to him. I sat on the edge of my bed and let the reality wash over me like a cold wave. I was alone, completely alone. At 64 years old, penniless, cut off from my account, with nowhere to turn. Fear settled in my stomach like a cold stone. I could die right here, and Marcus wouldn't find out until someone reported the smell. I could get sick again, and there would be no one to knock on my door. I could scream, and no one would hear me. The tears began to fall uncontrollably. I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. I cried for the mother I was. I cried for the sacrifices I made. I cried for the love I gave that was never enough. I cried for the woman who was now sitting on this bed, invisible and forgotten. But at some point in the middle of that heartbreaking cry, something shifted. The crying stopped. The tears dried. And in their place, something different appeared. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Rage. Not the explosive rage that breaks things. Not the rage that screams and curses. It was a cold, silent rage, firm as steel. I got out of bed and looked at myself in the dresser mirror. I saw an older woman with a face swollen from crying and red eyes. But I also saw something more. I saw a woman who had survived things that would have destroyed others. I raised a son alone. I worked 3 jobs at once. I paid every bill. I kept a roof over our heads. I fed him even when I went without eating. I clothed him even when I wore old patched-up clothes. I built a human being from scratch. I gave him education values and opportunity. And if I could do all that back then when I was younger, but also poorer and more scared, then I could survive this now. Marcus was waiting for my desperate call. He was waiting for me to beg, to plead, to prove to him that without him I was nothing. But he was wrong. I washed my face with cold water. I brushed my hair. I put on the only decent blouse I had left and went out into the street. I walked 4 blocks to the house of my neighbor Gladys, the same woman who had taken care of me when I was sick. I knocked on her door, my heart pounding hard in my chest. She opened it with a warm smile. She invited me in. She made me coffee without me even asking. She sat across from me in her small kitchen and waited for me to speak. I told her everything. I told her about the bank account. I told her about the grocery store. I told her about Marcus and his cruel silence. I told her about the $22 I had left and the food running out. Gladys listened in silence. When I finished talking, she took my hand in hers. She didn't tell me that Marcus surely had his reasons. She didn't tell me that kids sometimes get confused. She didn't say any of those empty phrases that people say to fill awkward silence. Instead, she said, "Ellie, you don't need that boy. You are stronger than you think." Then she got up and returned with an envelope. Inside were $150. She told me it was a loan with no rush to repay, that I should buy food pay for what I needed, and that when I could return it, I should, but not to worry about it now. I tried to refuse. It felt like too much. It felt like charity. It felt humiliating to accept money from a neighbor when my own son had left me with nothing. But Gladys closed my fingers over the envelope and looked me in the eye. Accepting help isn't weakness, Ellie. It's smart. I went home with those $150 clutched against my chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was the difference between eating and starving, between surviving and giving up. I slept a little better that night. The next day, I went to the grocery store. I bought the basics, no luxuries: rice, beans, eggs, bread, cheap vegetables. I calculated every cent. I stretched every dollar as far as I could. When the cashier checked out my items and said the total, I pulled out the cash with trembling hands. I paid, took my bags, and walked out of there with my head held high. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The following days, I established a routine. I woke up early, did gentle exercise at home to stay active. I cooked my meals carefully. I cleaned the apartment even though no one was coming to visit, because if I stopped taking care of myself, if I gave up, then Marcus would have won, and I wasn't going to let that happen. One afternoon, while I was doing the dishes, I heard a knock at the door. My heart leapt. For one stupid second, I thought it might be Marcus, that he had come to apologize, that he had come to his senses. I opened the door. It wasn't Marcus. It was a man I didn't recognize at first, tall, around 50 years old, well-dressed, but not ostentatiously so. He was looking at me with a strange expression, a mix of surprise and something like relief. "Mrs. Eleanor Hayes?" he asked in a soft voice. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "Who's asking?" The man smiled. "I don't know if you remember me. I'm Darius Miller." The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. He must have noticed my confusion because he continued speaking. "You helped me 15 years ago. I was just a boy who had just arrived in the city. I had nowhere to sleep. I had no money. I was desperately looking for work. You saw me sitting at the bus stop in the rain. You invited me into your home. You gave me food. You let me sleep on your sofa for 2 weeks until I got a job." The memories started flooding back, a young, skinny kid with scared eyes and soaked clothes. I did remember him. I had given him a bowl of hot soup and a blanket. Marcus was a teenager then, and he had complained about having a stranger in the house, but I told him that helping your neighbor wasn't optional. "Darius," I murmured. "Yes, I remember you," he nodded. "Mrs. Hayes, I never forgot what you did for me." "You didn't know me at all. You had no reason to trust me, but you did. You treated me with dignity when the rest of the world saw me as trash." It was nothing I said, looking down. Anyone would have done the same. "That's not true," he replied firmly. "No one else did. Only you." There was an uncomfortable silence. I didn't know what to say. Darius continued. "I've been looking for you for months. I wanted to thank you personally. I wanted you to know that thanks to the opportunity you gave me, I was able to build a life. Now I have my own business. I'm doing well, very well. I'm glad for you," I said sincerely. "But when I finally found you, I started asking a few questions, and I learned some things that worried me a lot, Mrs. Hayes." My body tensed. What things I heard: that your son cut off your access to your own accounts, that he left you without resources, and that you're going through some difficulties. I felt shame burn my cheeks. "It's none of your business," I murmured. "You're right," he said. "It's not my business, but I owe you a debt I can never fully repay. So let me help you now. I don't need charity." I replied with more sharpness than I intended. "It's not charity, Mrs. Hayes. It's justice." Darius Miller didn't wait for my response. He took a business card from his wallet and held it out to me. It read, "Darius Miller, financial advisor and legal consultant. Tomorrow at 10 Warser in the morning, I have an appointment with a lawyer friend of mine," he said calmly. "I'd like you to come with me. We need to review your financial situation, see what options you have, what rights you're entitled to." I shook my head. "I don't have money for lawyers." "I'm not charging you anything," he replied. "I'm doing this because I want to, because I have to, because 15 years ago you gave me something priceless: dignity and hope. Now let me return even a fraction of that. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell him I could handle it alone. But the truth was, I couldn't. The truth was, I was desperate. And the truth was, maybe, just Maybe this was the sign I had been waiting for without even knowing it. "Okay," I finally whispered. "I'll go." Darius smiled. "I'll pick you up at 9:30. And Mrs. Hayes, this is going to get better. I promise you." He left before I could answer. I stood there holding his card between my fingers, feeling that something was changing. I didn't know what exactly, but something was stirring in the shadows of my life. That night, I barely slept. I tossed and turned, thinking about what a lawyer could do, what rights I might have, whether there was any way to recover even some of what Marcus had taken from me. By 9 o'clock in the morning, I was dressed and ready. I put on my best dress, the one I saved for special occasions. I put on a little makeup. I carefully styled my hair. I wanted to look dignified. I wanted to look strong. Darius arrived right on time in a fancy car. He opened the passenger door for me like a true gentleman. During the drive, he asked me basic things, how I'd been all these years, if I still lived in the same condo, if I needed anything urgently. I told him the essentials. I didn't go into detail about Marcus. It still hurt too much to talk about it naturally. We arrived at a modern building downtown. We went up to the 5th floor. The office was spacious and bright. The door read, "Mr. Kenneth Thompson, Family and Estate Law." A man in his 60s with gray hair and kind eyes greeted us with a warm smile. He shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Hayes, it's a pleasure to meet you. Darius has told me a little about your situation. Please have a seat. We'll go over everything calmly." I sat in a comfortable chair across from his desk. Darius sat beside me. Ken opened a notebook and picked up a pen. "Tell me everything from the beginning," he said softly. "What exactly happened with your bank account?" I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told him how Marcus had convinced me to put everything in his name, how he had promised it was to make things easier, how I had trusted him blindly. I told him about the day at the grocery store, about the call to the bank, about the month that had passed without access to my own money. Ken listened, taking notes. Occasionally, he asked specific questions. How long the account had been in Marcus's name, whether I had signed any documents, whether there was any proof that I had contributed to the money. I explained that my deceased husband's Social Security survivor benefits were deposited into that account and that I had also put in my own savings, that technically part of that money was legally mine. Ken nodded slowly. "This is financial abuse," he said firmly, "and it is potentially a crime. Your son cannot simply cut off your access to funds that legally belong to you, especially if your Social Security is deposited there." I felt something stir in my chest. "You mean I can do something?" "Not only can you, Mrs. Hayes, you must," he replied. "This is a violation of your rights, and there are legal ways to recover what is yours." "But he's my son," I murmured. "I don't want to get him into trouble." Ken looked at me with a mixture of compassion and firmness. "Mrs. Hayes, your son left you without money to eat. He left you without access to your medication. He put you in a situation of extreme vulnerability. He's already in trouble." Trouble he created himself. Tears began to well up in my eyes. I couldn't help it. All of this was too much, too real, too painful. Darius handed me a tissue. Ken waited patiently for me to compose myself. "What do I need to do?" I finally asked, my voice trembling. Ken leaned back in his chair. "First, we'll subpoena your bank records. We'll prove that you have a legal claim to those funds. Then we'll send a formal letter to your son, demanding that he restore your access immediately. If he refuses, we will proceed legally. And if he claims the money is his, that you have no right to anything, then we'll go to court. And believe me, Mrs. Hayes' judges do not look kindly upon children who financially abuse their elderly parents, especially when there is clear evidence that you contributed to those funds. But that will take time," I said, feeling overwhelmed. "I need money now to eat to survive." Ken looked at Darius. Darius nodded as if they had discussed this beforehand. "We already thought about that," Darius said. "While the legal matters are being resolved, I'm going to help you with your basic expenses. It's not a loan, it's a gift, and I won't take no for an answer." I tried to protest, but Darius raised his hand. "Mrs. Hayes, you gave me a roof and food when I had nothing. You treated me like your own son. Please let me do this." I didn't know what to say. The words were stuck in my throat. I could only nod as tears streamed down my cheeks. Ken continued to explain the process, the documents I would need, the steps to follow. Everything sounded complicated, but he explained it patiently, making sure I understood every detail. He also mentioned something that surprised me. "Mrs. Hayes, I need to ask you something important. Did you ever lend your son money, specifically the $12,000 for the down payment on his house? How did you know that?" I asked, astonished. "I did some checking around," Darius replied. "I talked to some people who know both of you, and that information came out. Yes, I loaned him that money, I confirmed. 3 years ago. He promised to pay it back in 6 months. He never did. Do you have any documents proving that loan, a contract, a receipt, anything?" I shook my head, ashamed. No, I trusted his word. He was my son. Ken sighed. "That complicates things. Without written proof, it's difficult to recover that money, but we can try to include it in the general lawsuit. Sometimes children confess to these things when they're under legal pressure. We spent 2 more hours in that office. I signed documents authorizing Ken to request my bank records. I signed a power of attorney so he could act on my behalf. I signed everything they put in front of me, because for the first time in weeks, I felt like someone was on my side. When we left the building, the sun was shining brightly. Darius took me to lunch at a modest but cozy restaurant. He ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted, as if he knew I was too emotionally exhausted to make decisions. We ate in silence for a while. Then Darius spoke. "Mrs. Hayes, I know this is hard. I know that legally facing your son is probably the last thing you ever wanted to do in life. It is," I admitted. "I never thought it would come to this. But you deserve respect. You deserve dignity, and you deserve to have access to your own money. What Marcus did is not only cruel, it's illegal." I know I whispered. "But he's still your son," Darius said, "and you're still his mother. A mother who sacrificed everything for him. A mother who deserves better than this." We finished eating. Darius paid the bill despite my protests. Then he handed me an envelope. "There are $2,000 in there," he said before I could speak. "Use it for whatever you need, food, medicine bills, whatever, and don't worry about paying it back. When this is settled and you get your money back, if you want to give me something, fine. If not, that's fine too." "Darius, this is too much," I said, my voice breaking. "Nothing is too much for the woman who saved my life," he replied firmly. He drove me back home. Before I got out of the car, he gave me a phone number. "It's my personal cell. Call me if you need anything at all, anytime I mean it." I walked into my condo with the envelope clutched against my chest. I closed the door, leaned against it, and finally, after weeks of pain and fear, I felt something different. Hope. The following days were a whirlwind of activity that I hadn't experienced in a long time. I felt useful, busy, alive in a way I had forgotten was possible. Ken called me 3 days after our meeting. His voice sounded satisfied. "Mrs. Hayes, I have good news. I got the bank records from the last 5 years. And what do they say?" I asked, my heart pounding. "They say you have a solid case. Your Social Security survivor benefits have been deposited into that account religiously every month. That's $250 monthly for 5 years. That's $15,000 that entered that account and is legally yours." The number took my breath away. I had never thought of that money that way. I had never added it up. I only knew that my pension arrived and that Marcus supposedly used it to help me with my expenses. But now I realize that I barely saw any of that money. Marcus gave me $200 a month when he remembered. Sometimes less, sometimes nothing. Where was the rest of my money? That's the right question, Ken said. The records show that Marcus has been spending freely from that account. Expensive restaurants, travel, luxury purchases. There's a charge for $8,000 at a jewelry store 6 months ago. Another for $15,000 at a travel agency a year ago. I felt the rage return, cold and hard. Marcus had been living well on my money while I was counting pennies to buy rice. There's something else, too, Ken continued. I found evidence that you deposited your own savings into that account. $2,500 4 years ago. Money you earned working before you retired. Yes, I said, my voice trembling. That was when Marcus convinced me to unify everything into a single account so it would be easier to manage. He said that way he could help me better with my finances. What he did is called misappropriation of funds Mrs. pays, and we have all the evidence we need to prove it. What's next? I asked. Now we send him a formal letter. A letter explaining that we know exactly what he did. That he has 7 days to restore your full access to the account and to compensate you for the funds he improperly spent. If he doesn't respond or refuses, we proceed with a formal lawsuit. Do it, I said without hesitation. I was no longer afraid. I no longer had doubts. Marcus had crossed a line that there was no coming back from. The letter was sent the next day via certified mail. Ken told me Marcus would have to sign for it so we would know exactly when he read it. Meanwhile, Darius kept visiting me regularly. He brought food, he brought companionship, he brought stories from his life that made me laugh for the first time in months. He told me how after I gave him shelter 15 years ago, he got a job at an accounting firm. He started from the bottom cleaning offices, but he was smart and observant. He learned, studied, at night earned certifications, and climbed the ladder. Now he had his own financial consulting firm. He had employees, important clients. He had a life that seemed like it came out of a dream. And it all started because you gave me a chance. He told me one afternoon while we drank coffee in my small kitchen, because you saw me as a human being when everyone else saw me as a problem. I just did the right thing, I replied, feeling uncomfortable with so much gratitude. Exactly. He said, you did the right thing. Now let me do the right thing, too. A week later, Ken called me urgently. Mrs. Hayes Marcus received the letter 3 days ago, and he responded today. What did he say? I asked, feeling my stomach clench. He's furious. He sent a letter from his own lawyer saying that all the money in that account is legally his, because the account is in his name, that you have no right to those funds, and that if we insist on this, he will counter-sue for defamation. It's a common intimidation tactic, Ken continued. But it won't work. We have the evidence. We have the records that show where that money came from, and we have the law on our side. So what do? I asked. We proceed with the formal lawsuit. We go to court, and we are going to win. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but from something else. The certainty that this was really happening, that I was truly facing my own son, that our relationship, whatever little was left of it, was about to be completely destroyed. But there was no turning back. And honestly, I didn't want to turn back anymore. Darius showed up at my door the next day with something unexpected. A new cell phone more modern than the old one I had. You need a better phone, he said, handing it to me. It's already set up. It has my number and Ken's. And I also got you an unlimited data plan so you can call and use the internet without worrying. I tried to refuse, but he insisted. Plus, he said with a smile, I need you to be able to receive emails because I have something else for you. What is it? I asked, confused. I sat down in front of the laptop he had brought. Darius opened several documents on the screen. I did a complete investigation of your financial situation, he explained, and I found something interesting. You worked for a cleaning company for 25 years, right? Yes, I confirmed until I retired 6 years ago. That company had an employee retirement fund, a fund that you automatically contributed to from your paycheck every month. It's a small amount, but over 25 years it accumulated. I didn't know anything about that, I said, surprised. Most employees didn't, Darius replied. The company didn't make much effort to inform people, but I investigated. I talked to them. And it turns out you have $8,500 in that fund that you never claimed. $8,500. Another number that seemed unreal. How is it possible that they never told me? I asked. They sent a letter to your address when you retired, but according to their records, the letter was returned probably because you had already moved to this condo. Darius took some forms from his briefcase. You need to sign these documents to claim that money. The process takes about 3 weeks, but that money is yours legally without dispute. I signed the papers with trembling hands. I couldn't believe what was happening. Money I thought I didn't have. Money that was mine by right. Money that meant independence. But that's not all, Darius continued. I also checked if you qualified for any assistance programs for seniors, and it turns out you do. There's a state program that can provide you with an additional $250 a month for medical and food expenses. How come I didn't know any of this? I asked, feeling overwhelmed. Because nobody told you, Mrs. Hayes, and because Marcus probably never cared to find out. He wanted you to depend on him to need him, because that gave him power. The following days were filled with intense paperwork, signatures, forms, documents. Darius helped me with everything. Ken, too. Between the two of them, they were building a legal and financial shield around me. And slowly, very slowly, I began to feel different. I began to feel powerful. 2 weeks later, I received an email on my new phone. It was from the cleaning company I had worked for. They confirmed that my request had been approved. The $8,500 would be deposited into my new account, the account Darius had helped me open at a different bank, an account where only I had access. I cried when I read that email, not from sadness, but from relief, from gratitude, from victory. Darius called me that same afternoon. I have one more surprise for you, he said in a mysterious voice. I'll pick you up tomorrow at 10:03. Put on something nice. What surprise? I asked. You'll see, he replied and hung up. The next morning, I got ready with care. I put on my best dress, did my makeup, and styled my hair. When Darius arrived, he whistled in admiration. You look beautiful, Mrs. Hayes. He drove me to a car dealership, an elegant dealership with shiny, gleaming cars. He parked and looked at me with a smile. What are we doing here? I asked, confused. You need transportation, he said simply, and I need to buy a new car. So we're going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. My current car is only 2 years old. It's in perfect condition. I don't need it anymore. So I'm going to give it to you. Darius, I can't accept a car. I protested. Yes, you can, he replied, and you will because you deserve to move around freely. You deserve not to depend on buses or anyone else. You deserve to have your own ride. I tried to argue, but he was already getting out of the car. I followed him inside the dealership. A half hour later, we were signing the transfer papers. The car was now in my name, a beautiful silver car with barely $20,000 M on it. Darius handed me the keys. It's yours, Mrs. Hayes. Enjoy it. I stood in the dealership parking lot holding those keys, looking at that car that was now mine. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I felt like my life belonged to me again. Learning to drive that car was like learning to live again. It had been years since I sat behind a steering wheel. When my husband died, I sold our old car because I couldn't afford the maintenance or the gas. Since then, it had been the bus long walks depending on the goodwill of others to get places. But now I had my own car, my own freedom on 4 wheels. Darius came with me the first few times. He took me to an empty parking lot where I practiced for hours starting braking, turning, parking. My hands were shaking at first. I was afraid of crashing, of scratching the car, of making a mistake. But little by little, the muscle memory returned. The movements became more natural. Confidence grew. A week later, I dared to drive alone for the first time. I only went to the grocery store, which was 10 blocks from my house. But those 10 blocks felt like crossing a continent. I parked, I did my shopping. I returned to the car with my bags. And when I got home and turned off the engine, I sat in silence for several minutes, smiling like a fool. I had done it alone, without help, without depending on anyone. The days passed, and I felt stronger every day. The money from the retirement fund had arrived in my account. $8,500 gleamed on my phone screen every time I checked the bank app. My money in my account under my control. The approval for the state assistance program had also arrived. $250 additional dollars every month. It wasn't much, but added to my pension, which I would soon recover, it meant stability. It meant not having to count every cent in terror. Gladys, my neighbor, noticed the change in me. One day she invited me over for tea and looked at me with that wise smile that women who have lived a lot have. "You look different, Ellie," she said. "You look taller, stronger." "I feel different," I admitted. "I feel like I was asleep for years and have finally woken up." She nodded. "That's what happens when you stop living for others and start living for yourself." Her words stayed with me. She was right. For decades I had lived for Marcus. My decisions, my sacrifices, my dreams, everything had revolved around him. And when he tossed me aside like trash, I almost gave up. I almost accepted that without him I was nothing. But now I knew the truth. I had always been someone, a woman with self-worth, a woman who didn't need her son's validation to exist. Ken called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "We have a date for the preliminary hearing," he announced. "It will be in 3 weeks. The judge will review the evidence from both sides and decide if there is merit to proceed to trial." "Will we be ready?" I asked. With nervousness I couldn't hide. "More than ready," he replied with confidence. "We have bank documents, deposit records, evidence of unauthorized expenses. We have a solid case, Mrs. Hayes. Marcus has no way to justify what he did." "And what if the judge doesn't believe us?" I asked in a low voice. "He will believe us," Ken said firmly. "Numbers don't lie, and judges don't tolerate financial elder abuse. Believe me." I hung up the phone and looked out the window. In 3 weeks, I would see Marcus face to face. In 3 weeks, I would have to look him in the eye, knowing that I had taken him to court, knowing that our relationship, if anything was left of it, would be destroyed forever. Part of me still hurt the part that was a mother, the part that remembered the child who once hugged me and told me I was his hero. That part wanted to cry, wanted to give up, wanted to call him and tell him to forget about all of this. But the other part of me, the part that had grown and strengthened over these last few weeks, knew I couldn't do it. I knew Marcus needed to face the consequences of his actions, and I knew I deserved justice. I decided to prepare for that encounter. I didn't want to go to the courthouse feeling weak or afraid. I wanted to arrive feeling powerful. I started taking better care of myself. I walked every morning in the nearby park. I bought nutritious food with the money I now had. I allowed myself small luxuries that I once considered impossible. A coffee at the corner coffee shop, a magazine, a haircut at a decent salon. I also started writing. I bought a notebook, and every night before bed I wrote down my thoughts. I wrote about the pain Marcus had caused me, about the years of sacrifice he had forgotten, about the betrayal that still burned in my chest. But I also wrote about my rebirth, about Darius and his unexpected loyalty, about Gladys and her generous friendship, about Ken and his tireless advocacy, about all the people who had shown me that I did matter. Writing helped me sort through my emotions, see clearly what had happened and what was happening, and mentally prepare for what was to come. A week before the hearing, Darius came to visit me with a proposal. "Mrs. Hayes, I know this is going to sound strange, but I want us to rehearse. Rehearse what I asked, confused. The day of the hearing, Ken is going to ask you questions. Marcus's lawyer will too. I want us to practice your answers to make you feel confident so they don't catch you off guard." We spent the entire afternoon rehearsing. Darius played the role of the hostile lawyer, throwing difficult questions at me, trying to confuse me to make me doubt. "Isn't it true that you gave your son permission to manage that account however he wanted?" he asked in a harsh voice. "I gave him permission to help me manage it," I replied in a firm voice. "I didn't give him permission to steal my money. How can you call it stealing when the account is legally in his name? Because that money came from my Social Security, from my work, from my savings. The fact that the account is in his name doesn't change whose money it is." Over and over, we went through the possible questions. Over and over, I practiced staying calm, remaining firm, and not letting myself be intimidated. By the end of the afternoon, Darius smiled. "You're going to do great, Mrs. Hayes. You're going to surprise everyone in that room." 2 days before the hearing, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I took out the old photos of Marcus, the ones I had put away in the drawer, the ones that showed the smiling boy he once was. I looked at them one by one. Marcus, at 3 years old, covered in chocolate. Marcus at 8, proudly showing off his first soccer trophy. Marcus at 15 on his high school graduation day. Marcus at 22, the day he graduated from college. In every photo, I was there behind him, beside him, holding him up, cheering him on, loving him. But he no longer saw me. He no longer valued me. He no longer loved me the way a son should love his mother. I put the photos back in the drawer. I closed the drawer gently and decided I wouldn't take them out again. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I needed to move on. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, imagining what it would be like, how I would feel seeing Marcus after almost 2 months without contact. What expression would be on his face? Would he feel shame? Would he feel regret? Would he feel anything at all? At 6 in the morning, I got up. I showered with hot water, letting the steam fill the bathroom. I dressed in the most elegant outfit. I had a gray suit I had bought at a consignment store, but that looked dignified and professional. I put on my makeup carefully, not too much, just enough to look rested and confident. I pinned my hair back in an elegant bun. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman I didn't entirely recognize. A woman with a straight back, a firm gaze, and a jaw clenched in determination. This was me now, no longer the pleading mother, no longer the woman who accepted crumbs, no longer the one who apologized for existing. Darius arrived right on time at 8. He opened the car door for me with an encouraging smile. Ken was waiting for us at the courthouse entrance with his briefcase full of documents. "Are you ready?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "I'm ready." We entered the building. Our footsteps echoed in the marble hallways. The air smelled of old paper and pending justice. And then turning a corner, I saw him. Marcus was standing in front of the hearing room. He was wearing an expensive suit. Next to him was his lawyer, a tall man with a serious expression. And next to him, Tiffany glaring at me with barely concealed disdain, as if I were the villain in this story, as if I were the one who had done something wrong. Our eyes met, and in that moment, when I saw the expression on his face, a mixture of shock, rage, and something akin to fear, I knew I had made the right decision. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to give him the pleasure of seeing me broken. I raised my chin, held his gaze without blinking, and walked toward the hearing room with my head held high. The hearing room was smaller than I had imagined. Cream-colored walls, rows of wooden benches, and at the front, the elevated desk where the judge would sit to decide our fate. Ken guided me to our table. Darius sat in the first row behind us, his presence quiet but comforting. Across the room, Marcus sat down next to his lawyer. He didn't look at me again. He kept his gaze forward, his jaw tight, his hands clenched on the table. Tiffany sat behind him, glaring at me. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The judge entered. A man in his 60s with completely white hair, his expression serious, but not cruel. He sat down and gestured for us to do the same. Case number 47328, he read from his computer. Eleanor Hayes versus Marcus Hayes. Dispute over fund access and misappropriation. Let us proceed. Ken stood up. "With your permission, Your Honor, I would like to present my client's situation first." The judge nodded. "Go ahead." Ken began to speak. His voice was clear, firm, and professional. He explained how Marcus had convinced me to put the account in his name, how he had cut off my access without warning, and how he had left me without resources for basic necessities. Then he presented the evidence, the bank records projected onto a large screen, my monthly Social Security deposits clearly marked, and the excessive withdrawals and expenditures Marcus had made. A charge of $8,000 at a jewelry store. Ken pointed out another for $15,200 at a travel agency. multiple charges at luxury restaurants totaling over $20,000 in the last year. All of this while my client was surviving on rice and beans. The judge studied the documents carefully, making notes. From time to time, he looked up at Marcus, who was sinking lower and lower into his chair. We also have evidence, Ken continued, that Mrs. Hayes deposited $2,500 of her own savings into this account 4 years ago, money she earned working, money that Mr. Hayes has used as if it were his own. Marcus's lawyer stood up. Objection, Your Honor. The account is legally in my client's name. He has every right to manage those funds as he sees fit. The judge looked at him with a raised eyebrow. Even when those funds come from his elderly mother's pension, even when he left her without access to her own money, even when she needed that money to survive, the lawyer hesitated. Mr. Hayes was trying to protect his mother from unnecessary expenses, trying to ensure the money was used wisely. By buying $8,000 in jewelry, the judge asked dryly, "Is that protection or appropriation?" An uncomfortable silence filled the room. The judge turned to Marcus. "Mr. Hayes, please stand." Marcus slowly got to his feet. His face had lost all color. "Explain to me," the judge said, "how spending $8,000 at a jewelry store protects your mother. Explain to me how $15,000 trips are for her benefit." Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. Marcus cleared his throat. I thought the money was for family use," he stammered. "For all of us. That money is your mother's Social Security survivor benefit." The judge replied in a cold voice. "It is not a family fund. It is the sustenance of a 64-year-old woman who worked her entire life, and you spend it on personal luxuries while she wondered how she was going to eat." Marcus lowered his gaze. He had no answer. He couldn't justify the unjustifiable. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Hayes, please stand." I stood up, my legs trembling. Ken gave my arm a discreet squeeze. "Tell me in your own words what happened the day you discovered you didn't have access to your account," the judge said in a softer voice. I took a deep breath. "I was at the grocery store," I began. "I had filled my cart with the basics, simple things, food, medicine. When I tried to pay, my card was rejected. I had to leave everything there and walk out with empty hands. The humiliation was terrible." My voice broke a little. Ken passed me a glass of water. I took a sip and continued. "I called the bank and they told me that only the account holder could make transactions. My son, the son I raised alone, the son I worked 3 jobs for, the son I gave everything I had, he had cut off my access without even telling me." "And what did you do after that?" the judge asked. "I almost called him," I admitted. I almost begged him to explain, but then I realized it wasn't a mistake. He knew what he was doing. He was punishing me. He was controlling me. He was waiting for me to come groveling to him, but I didn't. "You did not," the judge confirmed. "No, I did not," I said firmly. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. The judge nodded with what seemed like approval. He turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Hayes, be seated." Marcus dropped into his chair. He looked defeated, small. The judge reviewed more documents. "I see here that you also loaned your son $12,000 3 years ago for the down payment on a house. Is that correct, Mrs. Hayes?" "Yes, Your Honor," I confirmed. "He promised to pay it back in 6 months. He never did. And do you have any documents proving that Loan A signed contract?" I shook my head ashamed. No, I trusted his word. He was my son. The judge looked at Marcus sternly. "Mr. Hayes, is it true that your mother loaned you that amount?" Marcus hesitated. His lawyer whispered something urgently. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, it's true. And I intended to pay her back, "Things got complicated," Marcus murmured. "Or you couldn't or wouldn't," the judge said. "Mr. Hayes, let me be very clear. What you did is not only morally reprehensible, it is legally questionable. cutting off an elderly woman from her own pension, spending those funds on personal luxuries, and then having the audacity to say it was to protect her that borders on financial elder abuse, a serious offense in this state. Marcus's lawyer quickly stood up. Your Honor, my client is willing to reach a settlement to restore Mrs. Hayes' access immediately to compensate her for any inconvenience. Ken stood up. With due respect, Your Honor, a simple restoration of access is not enough. My client demands compensation for the improperly spent funds. She demands the immediate repayment of the $12,000 loaned, and she demands that his name be removed from any account shared with Mr. Hayes to prevent future abuse. The judge considered this. Mr. Hayes stand up again. Marcus rose with difficulty. He looked about to collapse. Do you have the financial capacity to compensate your mother for the funds you spent from her pension? The judge asked. Marcus looked desperately at his lawyer. I would need time. I don't have that amount liquid right now. How much did you spend from your mother's pension in the last year? The judge asked, checking the documents. Approximately $40,000 according to these records. Money that should have been for her sustenance. Marcus didn't answer. Tiffany, sitting behind him, looked pale, finally understanding the magnitude of what they had done. The judge took off his glasses and looked at both of us. I'm going to take a 15-minute recess. When I return, I will give my decision. I strongly suggest that both parties consider a settlement during this time, because if I have to dictate a sentence, Mr. Hayes, I assure you that you will not like the result. He stood up and left the room. We all stood. Ken turned to me. You're doing perfectly, Mrs. Hayes. Stay firm. On the other side of the room, Marcus's lawyer was talking urgently with him and Tiffany. I watched them gesticulate, arguing in furious whispers. Then Marcus stood up and walked slowly toward our table. Ken and Darius tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. But Marcus wasn't approaching with aggression. He was approaching with defeat. Mom, he said in a hoarse voice. His voice sounded strange, as if he hadn't said that word in a long time. I looked at him expressionless. I didn't say anything. I just waited. I need to talk to you alone, please. Ken was about to object, but I raised my hand. It's okay. We walked out into the hallway. We stood facing each other, my son and I, bound by blood, but separated by an abyss of pain and betrayal. I'm sorry, he finally said. Tears were starting to form in his eyes. I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't know what happened to me. How did I get here? I looked at him in silence. Part of me wanted to hug him. Part of me wanted to tell him everything was okay, but it wasn't. And I wasn't going to lie. You know what you did to me, I said in a calm but firm voice. You didn't just take the money. You took my dignity. You made me feel like I was worthless, that I was a burden. You waited for me to come crawling and begging. Marcus sobbed. I didn't mean to. Things just got out of control. You had control, I countered. Control over my money, control over my life, and you used it to hurt me. How can I fix this? He asked desperately. I looked him straight in the eyes. You're going to restore my access right now. You're going to pay me the $12,000 I loaned you within 6 months, or you'll sell whatever you have to sell, and you're going to compensate me with $20,000 for the funds you spent from my pension. Or we go back in there and I let the judge decide, and I assure you he'll be less generous than I am. Marcus turned pale. $20,000, Mom, I don't have it. Then sell it, I said curtly. Sell your luxury car, sell your jewelry, sell what you bought with my money. You have 6 months for the $20,000 and 6 months for the $12,000, or I'll see you in court. You decide. Marcus wiped his tears. His hands were shaking. Okay, I'll do it, I promise. Your promises don't mean anything to me anymore, Marcus, I said sadly, but legal documents do. Ken is going to prepare an agreement. You're going to sign it, and if you default, you will lose much more than money. We returned to the room. Marcus spoke with his lawyer. When the judge returned, Ken announced that we had reached a settlement. The judge listened to the terms. He nodded in approval. That seems fair to me. Prepare the documents. I want them signed before you leave this building. An hour later, everything was signed and notarized. Marcus avoided my gaze. Tiffany completely ignored me. I walked out of the courthouse with my head held high. I had won, and not just the money. I had won my dignity back. The days after the hearing were strange, quiet in a different way. It wasn't the heavy silence of loneliness and abandonment I had felt before. It was a silence of peace, of quiet victory, of knowing that I had done the right thing. 2 days after the hearing, I received a notification from my bank. My access had been fully restored. I opened the app on my phone, and there it was. My account, my money, my control. There were $6,000 in the account. It wasn't everything that should have been there. Marcus had spent so much, but it was a start. And with the payments he would have to make, I would eventually recover what belonged to me. The first thing I did was transfer all that money to my new personal account, the account where only I had access, where no one could touch a single cent without my permission. Then I closed the shared account with Marcus forever. That afternoon, Gladys came to visit me with a cake she had baked. She sat with me at my small kitchen table and looked at me with those wise eyes that had seen so much in life. "You did it," she said simply. "You got your life back." "Yes," I replied. Feeling tears threatened to spill. I did it, but it feels strange, like I won something, but I also lost something. "You lost the illusion," Gladys said gently. "The illusion that your son was who you thought he was. And that hurts. It always hurts. But it's better to live in the painful truth than in the comfortable lie." She was right. I had been living a lie for years, pretending that Marcus still loved me, pretending that his coldness was temporary, pretending that things would go back to how they were. But now I lived in the truth, and although it hurt, it was also liberating. Darius continued to visit me regularly. He took me places I never would have had the courage to visit alone. The art museum, the theater, free concerts in the park. He showed me that there was life beyond the pain, that there was beauty beyond the betrayal. One afternoon, he took me to a small coffee shop overlooking the river. We sat on the patio as the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink. "Mrs. Hayes, I have to tell you something." He began, his voice serious. My heart sped up. "What is it I've been thinking a lot about all of this? About how you helped me years ago, about how I was able to help you now. And I realized something. Life is a circle. The kindness we give comes back to us sometimes in ways we never imagined." I smiled. I always believed that, even though these last few months made me doubt it. "But it's true," Darius insisted. "You gave me shelter when I had nothing. And look now, I was able to give some of that back to you when you needed it. That's how the universe works. Kindness is never lost." His words struck me deep. He was right. I had spent so many years giving everything to Marcus, expecting him to give it back to me. But the universe returned that kindness to me through Darius, through Gladys, through people who owed me nothing, but chose to help me anyway. 3 weeks after the hearing, Marcus made his first payment. $10,000 deposited into my account. There was no message with the deposit, no note, no additional apology, just the money, and that was enough for now. I used part of that money to pay back Gladys the $150 she had loaned me when I needed it most. She tried to refuse it, but I insisted. "You helped me when no one else did," I told her, putting the money in her hands. "Please let me do this." She finally accepted with tears in her eyes. "You're a good woman, Ellie. Don't let anyone ever make you think otherwise." With the rest of the money, I did something I never thought I would do. I bought myself new clothes. Not secondhand clothes, not old and worn-out clothes, but new clothes that made me feel beautiful, that made me feel alive. I also allowed myself small luxuries, a subscription to a streaming service, new books, fresh flowers from my condo, simple things that filled my life with color. One morning, as I drank coffee by my window, looking out at the street, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Grandma," a small voice replied, making my heart stop. It was Zoe Marcus's daughter, my 9-year-old granddaughter, whom I hadn't seen in almost 4 months. Zoe, I whispered instantly, feeling the tears well up. Sweetheart, how are you? I miss you, Grandma, she said, her voice trembling. Dad won't let me visit you. He says you're fighting, but I don't understand why. I just want to see you. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I miss you too, my love, so much. I took Dad's phone when he was in the shower, she confessed. I don't have much time, but I wanted to hear your voice. I wanted you to know that I didn't forget you. I could never forget you either. I told her, crying openly. You are my treasure, my beautiful girl. Will you come to my birthday party next month? She asked hopefully. I'm turning 10. I don't know if your dad will invite me, honey, I replied honestly. I don't care if he invites you or not, she said with a determination that surprised me. I want you there. It's my birthday and I decide who comes. I have to hang up Grandma. Dad is out of the shower. I love you. I love you too, my angel, so much. The call ended. I sat there with the phone in my hand crying, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of love. My granddaughter hadn't forgotten me. She still loved me. She still needed me. And that meant not everything was lost. 2 weeks later, I received an invitation in the mail, a handmade invitation with colored crayons, addressed to Grandma Eleanor from Zoe. My birthday party. Please come. Inside was a note in a 9-year-old's messy handwriting. Grandma, I told Dad that if you don't come, I don't want the party. He said it's okay for you to come. Please come. I miss you so much. I called Darius immediately. I need a favor. Anything, he replied without hesitation. I need help buying the best birthday present for a 10-year-old girl, and I need the courage to face my son again. Darius laughed. The gift is easy to get, and the courage, Mrs. Hayes, you already have it. You just need to remember it. On the day of Zoe's birthday, I got ready with care. I put on one of my new dresses, did my makeup, and styled my hair. I wanted my granddaughter to see me radiant. I wanted her to know that her grandmother was okay. Darius accompanied me. He insisted on being present in case I needed moral support. We arrived at Marcus's house at 3 in the afternoon, exactly as the invitation stated. The door was open. There were balloons and decorations everywhere, children running and laughing, and there in the middle of everything was my Zoe. When she saw me, her little face lit up like a Christmas tree. Grandma, she shouted, running toward me. I caught her in my arms and hugged her with all my strength. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and cake. She felt warm, alive, and perfect. You came, she sobbed against my shoulder. I thought you weren't coming. Nothing in this world could have stopped me from coming, I whispered in her ear. Nothing. Marcus appeared at the door. He looked uncomfortable as he watched us. Tiffany stood behind him with an unreadable expression. Eleanor, my son said in a strained voice, Thanks for coming. Thanks for allowing me to come, I replied with polite coldness. Zoe took my hand and dragged me inside. She showed me every decoration. She introduced me to all her friends. She made me feel like I was the guest of honor. Throughout the afternoon, Marcus avoided me. We didn't speak beyond forced courtesies, but it didn't matter. I hadn't come for him. I had come for my granddaughter. When they blew out the candles and cut the cake, Zoe looked for me among all the guests. She smiled at me, and in that moment I knew this was enough. I hadn't recovered my son, and maybe I never would, but I hadn't lost my granddaughter, and that was more valuable than any amount of money. At the end of the party, as the guests left, I helped clean up despite Tiffany's protests. Zoe stayed glued to me the whole time, as if she feared that if she let go, I would disappear. When it was finally time for me to leave, Zoe hugged me tightly. You'll come to see me again, right? You won't disappear again. I'll come, I promised her. I swear. Now that I know you want me here, nothing is going to stop me. Marcus walked me to the door. Before I left, he spoke in a low voice. Mom, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but thank you. Thank you for coming. Zoe has been sad for months. Today was the first time I saw her truly happy. She shouldn't pay for our mistakes. She shouldn't, I replied. Children should never pay for the mistakes of adults. You're right, he murmured. Listen, I know things between us will never be like they were before I understand that I accept it. But Zoe needs you. So if you want to visit her, you're welcome to. I nodded. It wasn't a complete apology. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a small bridge over the abyss that separated us. I left that house feeling different. I hadn't recovered my son, but I had recovered something more important. My dignity, my strength, my life, and I had held on to the love of my granddaughter, and that was everything. 6 months have passed since that day in the courthouse, 6 months since I recovered my life. And now sitting on my condo balcony with a hot cup of coffee in my hands, watching the sunrise paint the sky with colors I didn't stop to appreciate before I can say with certainty that I am a different woman. Marcus complied with the payments, not all on time. Some arrived weeks late, but they arrived. The $32,000 he owed me between what he borrowed and what he stole were deposited into my account over these months. The last payment arrived a week ago. No message, no additional apology, just the money. And that's fine. I didn't need his words. I needed justice. And I got it. With that money, I did something I never imagined I would do. I invested in myself. I hired a financial advisor, a colleague of Darius's, who helped me open a high-interest savings account, plan my future, and ensure that I would never depend on anyone again. I also fixed up my condo. I painted the walls a warm color that makes everything feel cozier. I bought new furniture to replace the old, worn-out pieces. I hung up pictures that make me smile every time I see them. I turned this place into a real home, my home. Not a place where I simply existed waiting for someone to remember me, but a place where I live fully. Darius is still part of my life. He comes to visit me at least once a week. Sometimes he takes me to new places. Sometimes we just sit and talk for hours. He tells me about his projects. I tell him about my small daily victories. There is a genuine friendship between us that I value more than words can express. A month ago, he introduced me to a woman named Cecilia Miller. His mother, a 70-year-old lady with a contagious laugh and a life story that made me cry. She had also gone through difficulties with her children. She had also had to learn to set boundaries. She had also had to rebuild herself. We became friends immediately. Now we get together every week with Gladys for tea and share our lives. 3 women who understand the pain of being forgotten mothers. 3 women who decided not to let that pain define us. My relationship with Marcus remains distant. We see each other at Zoe's birthdays, at school celebrations she participates in on important dates. We are cordial, polite, but the trust that once existed between us is broken. And honestly, I don't know if it will ever be repaired. But I have learned to be at peace with that. I've learned that I can't force anyone to love me the way I need to be loved. I've learned that some relationships, even blood relationships, have to transform. And sometimes that transformation means distance, means boundaries, means protecting your own heart. Zoe, however, is my light. I see her twice a week on Wednesdays after school and on Saturday afternoons. Marcus brings her to my condo and picks her up a few hours later. During that time, it's just her and me. We cook together. We do crafts. We read books. We talk about her dreams. She tells me things she would never tell her parents, her fears, her hopes, her worries about school. And I listen to her with all my attention. I give her advice when she asks for it. I hug her when she needs comfort. And I tell her every day that she is loved, that she is valuable, that she is enough. Because I want her to grow up knowing something I forgot for many years, that her worth does not depend on what others think of her, that her dignity is inherent, that she deserves unconditional respect and love. Last week, Zoe said something that made me cry. We were baking cookies when she suddenly stopped mixing the dough and looked at me very seriously. "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to be like you," she said. "Like me?" I asked, surprised. "Yes, strong, brave, able to stand up for yourself even when things are hard." Dad told me a little bit about what happened. Not all the details because he says I'm too young, but I know you fought for yourself, and that's really brave. I hugged her tightly. feeling my heart expand in my chest. "You are already brave, my love, more than you know. I've started doing things I always wanted to do, but never allowed myself." I signed up for a painting class at the community center. I discovered I have a certain talent for landscapes. My paintings aren't masterpieces, but they fill me with joy every time I finish one. I also started writing not just in my private notebook, but stories. Stories about women like me. Women who were forgotten, but found themselves women who rose from the ashes of their pain and built something beautiful. Cecilia convinced me to share one of my stories in a writing group for older adults that meets at the library. I was terrified, but I did it. And when I finished reading, there were tears in the eyes of several people. They told me my story had touched their hearts, that they saw themselves reflected in it. And I realized something powerful. My pain was not just mine. My story was not unique. There were thousands, maybe millions of women like me. Women who gave everything for their families only to be discarded when they were no longer convenient. Women who deserved to be heard, to be validated, to be honored. 2 weeks ago, I did something I never thought I would do. I donated $5,000 to a shelter for abandoned older women, women who weren't as lucky as I was, who didn't have a Darius show up in their lives, who didn't have a Ken to fight for them. When I handed the check to the shelter director, she hugged me with tears in her eyes. "You don't know how many lives you're going to change with this," she said. But I did know because someone changed mine, and now it was my turn to do the same for others. Yesterday afternoon, I was watering the plants on my balcony when the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there was Marcus alone without Zoe, without giving me a heads up. "Can we talk?" he asked in a soft voice. I let him in. I offered him coffee. We sat down in my new living room with an uncomfortable distance between us. "Mom," he started and then stopped. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I've been going to therapy ever since the lawsuit. My wife insisted, and I've been working on a lot of things. I'm glad," I said sincerely. "The therapist made me see things I didn't want to see. How I treated you, how I used you, how I took for granted everything you did for me. And I want you to know that I am ashamed. Deeply ashamed." Tears streamed down his face. "I don't know if you can ever forgive me, and I would understand if you can't, but I needed to tell you that I am truly sorry and that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be better, trying to be the son you deserved from the beginning." I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just watched him cry. I watched the man he had become finally face what he had done. "Marcus." I finally said, "I don't know if things between us will ever go back to how they were. Honestly, I don't think they can be. Some things once broken can't be fully repaired, but I appreciate your apology, and I appreciate that you're working on yourself." He nodded, wiping his tears. "That's all I can ask for." He stayed for another hour. We talked about superficial things, the weather, Zoe and her school performance, his work. It was strange, but not terrible. And when he left, he hugged me. An awkward, clumsy hug, but a hug nonetheless. I don't know what the future holds for our relationship. I don't know if we will ever be close again, but I know that I will be okay no matter what happens, because I finally learned the most important lesson of my life. My worth does not depend on how others treat me. My dignity is not subject to anyone's approval. My life belongs to me, and I am enough. I always was. This morning, I woke up with the sun streaming through my window. I made my favorite coffee. I sat on my new balcony and smiled. I smiled because I'm alive, because I have a roof over my head that I paid for with my own effort, because I have food in my cupboard and money in my account, because I have true friends who value me, because I have a granddaughter who loves me unconditionally. I smiled because I survived. And I didn't just survive, I was reborn. I am Eleanor Hayes. I am 64 years old, and my life is just beginning. To all the women who are reading this who might see themselves reflected in my story, I want to tell you something. If someone makes you feel invisible, if someone discards you as if you are worthless, if someone abuses your kindness and your love, Remember this: you are valuable, you matter, and you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Don't be afraid to set boundaries. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Don't be afraid to stand alone if necessary. Because sometimes the greatest strength isn't in enduring, it's in saying enough. And you who are reading this now, tell me, did you ever feel like someone tried to erase you from your own story? Did you ever have to fight for your dignity against someone who was supposed to love you? Did you ever rise from the ashes of betrayal and discover that you were stronger than you thought? Let me know in the comments, because our stories matter. Our voices deserve to be heard, and together we are unstoppable. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And always remember, it's never too late to take back your life. It's never too late to flourish. It's never too late to be who you were always meant to be. I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day, and now 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen, so you can choose what to watch.